and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turpeville. Most local folks know Larry Stewart today for his public service as a member of the College Station City Council. But long before he ever thought about entering local politics, he served 20 years in the U.S. Navy as a pilot, most of those years flying the P-3 patrol plane. A 1965 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. The first 6 months of his service was flying missions out of the Philippines to Vietnam during the war. The remaining 19 plus years sent him most anywhere there was an 8,000-foot runway. He spent 2.5 years based on the carrier USS Lexington. Yeah, the Lex, as it's well known today to many tourists to the Corpus Christi area. It's a fascinating military career, and we welcome Larry Stewart to Veterans of the Valley. Larry, it's a pleasure to have you here. You grew up in Bay City, went to Lamar High School, came to A&M for a year, but that $500 a year tuition was just too much for you. You had to find a free education somewhere, right?
It was too much money. Cut in my doggone automobile fund.
So you applied to the Naval Academy. I guess Congressman Lyndon B. Johnson at the time helped you get in, and you went to the Naval Academy. Talk about your career at the Naval Academy back in those days.
Well, the Naval Academy really wasn't too much different, I believe, what it is today. Except they have some nice newer buildings. They have ladies there.
Yeah.
And they took away all the big guns that we had when I was there.
Right.
We had a lot of 5-inch guns, stuff off the ships, but while I was there, the powers that be decided that we didn't need those things anymore because it was all going to be missiles. Of course, nobody paid attention to Vietnam 5 years later, but because then we're using all the same things all over again.
Right. Still played Army every year, though, right?
Oh,
beat
yes.
Army, right?
When I played, well, we beat them once while I was there. Roger Staubach was very, very nice to have on your team.
Oh, that's right. That would have been right around that would have been the same time.
Well, he was a classmate.
He was a classmate of yours. That's right. And then he did his service before he went to the Dallas Cowboys.
Right.
I remember that.
Right.
4 years at the Naval Academy and then to Pensacola for pilot training the next September. And you wanted to fly the 81 Sky Raider, but you got pretty much your second choice, the P-3. Talk about that airplane. It's a 4-engine prop airplane.
Four-engine turboprop airliner derivative. The P-3 is 88 inches shorter than the Lockheed Electra, which it spawned from, and the wings are significantly beefed up. The engines are also a bit more powerful. I mean, you're dealing with basically 10,000 shaft horsepower engines, 4 of them, but it takes so much power to drive the propeller. Your actual rated power is only 4,600, but it's still a 3-engine airplane design, but you've got 4 engines on it.
Right.
So we wander around on 3 engines most of the time, sometimes 2. But at the same time, the airplane was limited on how much power you could put on it because you could tear the wings off of it.
Right. So it's kind of like the old Electra, but smaller and more powerful,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Exactly. And durable airplane. I think you told me they were built in 1962 and they're just now phasing them out, right?
They started them in 61, 62, and just now next 2 or 3 months from now, they're going to receive the first replacement airplane, which is a twin-engine Boeing jet.
Right.
So that's over 50 years.
Right.
That's pretty good tour duty.
That's not bad. July of 67, a replacement training squadron in Maryland. And at first, when you got your first assignment to the East Coast, you thought, well, I'm going to Europe, I'm not going to Vietnam, but they pulled a switch on you, right?
It was a real switcheroo because I checked into Navy Jacksonville and was looking for my squadron. It wasn't there, and the duty officer hands me this big folder and says, "We've been waiting for you, Lieutenant. Go." And I got kind of go where? He said, "You're going west."
To Travis Field.
So to Travis Field,
Yeah,
and basically 48 hours after I checked in, I was flying over Vietnam.
After you checked in on the East Coast, you were flying towards to Vietnam. You were not based in country. You were based in the Philippines, and you flew your missions every night from the Philippines, unless there was bad weather, right?
Right. When we normally flew out of the Philippines, you launched just before sunset and worked up and down the coast. When there was a major storm out in the Gulf of Tonkin, that area, then they would move us over to someplace like Da Nang or Cam Ranh Bay airfields, and we were just up and down the coast every night. Looking for gun runners, smugglers, or coming in and providing the flares, those huge lights, that prayer flares for people to work under. We normally would go in and drop the flares and then the fighter bombers would work under the flares, which is a very unusual sight to see because the guy they're out in the dark, you can't see them. All of a sudden, the fighter comes in under the flare, dropping his weapons, whatever he's doing, and it's broad daylight.
Right.
Under the flares.
These are the flares that you all had dropped.
Yes, right.
And then you all go high and you're looking down to see not only the effect of the flares that you dropped, but then what was going on underneath that.
You'd watch what was going on underwards. And it was quite interesting. And for us, it was nice because as long as you followed the rules, and that was a big thing for many people in Vietnam, and particularly for the patrol planes. If you followed the rules, nobody's going to get hurt. If you did not follow the rules, you would get hurt. They killed 2 crews and aircraft of the squadron that relieved us. Happened just that way. They violated some procedures and got shut down.
There were a couple of crews of folks that you knew.
Yes, I knew.
That you knew very well.
Yes.
Right. Yes, I've been trying to recreate in my mind the dropping of the flares and what that site looked like. You talked about the P-3 and how you were a pilot, but you really had to be trained at all positions, whether it would be bombardier, navigator, just about all areas. You had to be trained to know how to do everything.
Yep. The pilots were cross-trained, and most of the crewmen were too, to at least 2 different positions, so that if anything happened to somebody on board the airplane, there was somebody else who could always back them up.
Right.
And you start off typically though as a navigator in those days, and you flew in the airplane as a navigator. You got some flight time too, but most of it was as a navigator. And then you would move up to the co-pilot position, and eventually move up to the plane commander or mission commander.
Right.
That's the guy who was in trouble, and in trouble or whatever, and responsible for the airplane all the time.
Exactly. Your tour of Vietnam was about 6 months. You came home right about the time of the Tet Offensive.
Right.
And you talked about when you came home from Vietnam, and you're home and you're in this environment, and you're sitting down and you're watching the reports of the war on TV. Sort of talk about how you related that to me and sort of the shock of what you were hearing versus what you knew was reality.
It was utterly incredulous. And Walter Cronkite was telling us that the war is lost and our side is getting beat up so terribly. And my first reaction, and the rest of the guys too, was, hey, we were just over there. We were watching those guys getting all blown to smithereens.
Right.
And it was just totally different. It was the view that the television crews were getting versus the views that the military were getting. It was totally different.
Right.
And it was kind of a shock, to put it mildly.
And disheartening.
Yes, very, very disheartening. And my last mission out there, we were working at night with a Coast Guard cutter that was shooting at targets inland, and he had a super spotter because he'd fire that little 5-inch gun, bang, bang, and you'd see the shells burst in the trees, and then about his 3rd or 4th shot, suddenly he's getting secondary detonations, which means he's hitting somebody's ammunition dump or fuel depot, and it's sort of like, we were doing this every night.
Yeah.
So what was wrong? What was happening that we didn't know about?
Right.
It was very strange and, like you say, very disheartening.
Indeed, indeed. I asked you about some of your dicier missions when you were in Vietnam, and like you just referred to, yours were less than others because you did follow the rules.
Right.
But you did have some times that were...
Well, the most exciting ones were when you worked up off of North Vietnam and you're looking for high-speed targets run up and down the coast. And one night, we were the only people around, and the high-speed target was coming south along the coast. They told us to go charging in, take a look at it, and bomb it if need be. So we're coming in at about 200 feet with bomb bay doors hanging open and a full load of weapons ready to go, and I'm in the right seat with the searchlight control, which was also the bombardier's position for that type of attack, and sweeping with the light, and suddenly I come up and here's 2 fast boats right there in front of us. And thank God I recognized what they were because they were a pair of U.S. Swift boats. And I just let go of the doggone handle, and like it was a snake. And it turned out later, we knew the guys on the boat. They were kind of upset they got lit off by us with the searchlight.
Right.
But if we'd let go of those 8 bombs, that would have been a mess.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, indeed it would. You came home from, you came back from Vietnam. I say came home for a while, but then you were off, and for, like we said, 19 plus years, you flew and flew and flew some more. Like you told me, just about any place there was an 8,000-foot runway, you went. Right. And this was Atlantic duty for the most part, North Atlantic duty for the most part, and you were looking for Russians.
Yep, we looked for Russians all the time, and generally speaking, we would find them. That's something that's never been documented in the books, probably because it's kind of difficult to write a dramatic story about an airplane just sitting up, hanging on the propeller, so to speak, and dropping listening devices into the water. But that's what we did, and basically there wasn't anything moving out in the Atlantic that we didn't know where they were. And it got to the point later that Admiral Gorshkov, who was the Supreme Russian Naval Commander, made a very open statement that whenever he wanted to know where his submarines were, because they had terrible communications, all he did was ask his people, where's the P-3s? And he knew where the airplanes were, then he knew where his ships were.
Right.
Because we were with them all the time.
Right.
And we had a lot of fun chasing the submarines. I mean, the Russian subs were louder than ours, so we could chase them. An American submarine you couldn't chase. He was too quiet.
Exactly.
And it was very interesting.
You said that there was a time that what turned out to be the first Soviet nuclear attack sub, part of your squadron caught a hold of that, and you chased him all the way from Newfoundland to Cuba. Is that right?
That's right. One crew caught him broaching in a rainstorm, and immediately identified who he was, and got a sniff of the submarine, so we knew what he looked like and sounded like. And then we followed that guy all the way from off of Newfoundland, a place called Argentia, down to Cuba when he went into Havana for his port call.
Right.
And we were able to do that because we were based at Argentia, Newfoundland, there's an old airfield up there, and the rest of us were based in Bermuda.
Right.
And Bermuda is an ideal place to cover the entire eastern seaboard of the United States, which is what we did.
Right. To give sort of an idea of when this was, you said that you were chasing subs off the coast of Bermuda when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon.
That's right.
1969. So sort of give you sort of a point in history there. But the places you were based, you listed them for me. I'll let you list them again, some of the ones. Newfoundland, Greenland?
Newfoundland, the Iceland, Bermuda, of course Jacksonville, Florida, and later Brunswick, Maine, Lodges Field in the Azores.
Greenland?
Well, Greenland we just in and out of. We really weren't based there.
Right.
You didn't want to stay in Greenland. And then Sicily, there's a base called Sigonella, Crete, there's an interesting base there called Ceuta Bay.
Right.
And then occasionally you'd go up into France, into Germany, and of course the big base at Rota, Spain is a very big patrol base. And Spain was a lot of fun because Spain was being right there at Gibraltar. Everybody going in and out of Gibraltar had to pass under your noses, and it became a point of honor that any submarine from any nation that went in and out of Gibraltar, we had to have him. You had to get a piece of that submarine.
There's a lot more of your career we want to talk about, but let's go to some photographs right now because we've talked about the P-3, and we've got some photographs of the P-3 and some of the young Navy pilot, and there you are. About how old were you in that picture?
About 40. That's way back when. This is much more fun. That's
than pictures of you.
Yeah,
you mean?
P-3s are much more fun.
That's a P-3.
Yep.
Right there. It's the 4 turboprop.
Yep.
Again, quite similar to people who can remember back to that time when they would fly on Braniff or Eastern Airlines or something like that when they'd fly in the Electra. Very similar body type.
That's true, but you don't want to ride in a P-3 because it's not comfortable.
No.
Because when they had the airplane crashes, like some people here may remember the one up at Buffalo, Texas, back in the early 60s, or actually 50s, late 50s, that was caused by a weakness in the wings. So the civilian airplanes, if they thought they would put a huge I-beam in there as the main wing beam of the airplane.
Right.
Well, that's what solved the problem in the airplanes. But the Navy, in all of their knowledge and knowing better, thought if one I-beam is good, two is better. So they put twin wing beams in a P3. The result is the only thing that flexes in bad weather are the engines. The engines, as you see sticking out there, they will actually flip-flop. But the wing and the fuselage is just rock solid. It's just like you put something together, hammer and nails. It will not move. The people move. You can look back in the airplane when you went through some rough weather. You could see people flying through the air.
So, yeah, it wouldn't be your normal passenger plane,
No, it's
right?
not a good passenger airplane. It's a fun airplane.
Yeah, but
not
it's a military fighter.
Right.
This is another.
This
on the
one,
ground.
this is down in Panama in 1977 for what we jokingly call the Nicaraguan campaign of '77, which is different. But you can see in this picture the airplane has his big searchlight on the starboard wing. That's that big ball that's out in the edge of the picture.
Right.
It's 10 million candle power.
Right.
And the only other things in that picture you can really see, there's a umbilical hanging down from it. That's a power unit.
And that searchlight would be operated from the right seater?
Yes, that's the right seater.
That's it. Now we're going to talk, we talked about this in the opening, I did, and we're going to talk about this more, but this is the USS Lexington, where you would serve later, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But this is the Lex, which I guess most everybody in Texas who has visited down to Corpus Christi know that it's in port there and quite a tourist attraction, and I know that 2.5 years on the Lex are quite memorable for you.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Lexington was a lot of fun. She was in far better condition than any ship that had sailed as much as she had deserved to be, but she had been maintained very, very well.
Right.
And she's just an outstanding vehicle. In fact, the way she stayed in good shape for so many years was that we had the battleship Alabama parked in Mobile, Alabama, and the ship was based out of Pensacola.
Right.
When you needed spare parts, you went over to the Alabama and you got them off the Alabama, because we'd worked a deal with the Alabama state people who maintained the park there. If we would give them something, they would give us free reign in their power plants.
Right.
And as a result, some people call the Lexington the USS Lexabama.
Because of the parts.
Yes.
It's hard to believe, looking at that picture that we just saw, that I've had grandkids that have run all over that flight deck and all over those bridges.
Well, that's the flight deck right there, the same ship.
Exactly.
That was the aircraft I flew when I was on board the ship. It's a little cargo airplane.
Right. And the Lexington mainly Pensacola, Corpus Christi,
Yep.
sort of back and forth. And you flew off of it, going out getting spare parts, and
Right.
like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
I was the senior watch officer on the ship, so that meant I was largely responsible for driving the ship most of the time.
Right.
And she was a heck of a lot of fun. We were at sea 2 weeks out of every month, running back and forth between Pensacola and Corpus Christi based upon who had the most students who were ready for carrier qualifications.
Right.
Then when we didn't have students out of the training command, we were also the ready deck for anybody in the fleet who needed carrier qualification as well.
Right.
So we could have a mixed bag of fighters and trainers, you name it.
Right. Right. And this is our final picture. This is this is later in your military career down in Milton, Florida.
Right. That's airplane is a T-34C, which is just now being replaced by the new T-6. But it's a wonderful little airplane.
You said this is the first new airplane you ever got to fly,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. After being in the Navy for over 15 years, I finally get to fly a new airplane.
And that was the trainer.
And I was a trainer. And that little airplane is fun. If anybody ever wants to get airsick, that's the airplane to do it in.
I want to backtrack a little bit after you served your time flying everywhere. Kind of a different job completely. You became a teacher and you taught ROTC at Linzer Polytech Institute in New York and near Troy, New York. That was quite a duty, obviously, teaching young men to become military people, right?
That was different. And at Rensselaer, it was different still because of the academic achievement of the students. When you would have a classroom and you could have 20, 25 students in your classroom, and you knew that quite possibly when you first met them, a quarter of those students were all perfect 800 SAT score people. And that gave you pause to realize just how smart these people were.
Right. Who's teaching who here? Right?
Exactly. Oh, they were terribly, terribly smart. So I used my opening statement was that I'm going to prove to all of you that you flunked the third grade. And that really got some comments. Well, the reason I could do that was back in those days, nobody had calculators. And you had to do a lot of plain old-fashioned mathematics, adding and subtracting in spherical trigonometry and celestial navigation. And if you don't keep the columns straight, you will make errors. It's just death and taxes. Anybody who's tried to do work in columns in accounting knows that.
Right.
But when you're young and in college and all that, you don't think about that kind of stuff because you know more than that instructor up there. You do.
That's right.
Some of them did.
And you had one guy that outsmarted the calculator.
Oh, yeah. That's right. I had one guy who outsmarted the calculator because all the calculators back then were base 10. And in that program, we worked in radian measure. And I find him using a calculator. I kind of got upset with him. And then I said, no, let's see if he gets the right answers. He had all the right answers because he'd worked out the conversion factors from base 10 to radian. So, but anytime a student's that smart, he's got it.
Some of your slower students there only had 760 to 780
Right.
SAT
those
scores,
are slow
right?
ones.
So yeah, some of your slower students. You taught there 3 years, and then it was to the Lexington in 1973, and we've talked a lot about that already. So we'll just go on. Navy War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and when I hear Newport, I know that I've vacationed there. That's not a bad gig.
No, that's not bad at all. That's one of the best deals going. It's a 1 year sabbatical, more or less. You've got some of the real cream level instructors, both military and civilian, and you've also got pretty much the cream of the officer corps as well, because you have not just Navy, you have Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Foreign Services. And the Foreign Service were just fascinating, the kind of people you got there. Like my favorite, it's almost a joke, is we had one Japanese senior officer who had come to the U.S. Naval War College after doing the Indian War College.
Right.
And he enjoyed telling a story how their major war game was how to invade a place called the Andaman Islands down in the Indian Ocean. And he told them how to do it in his report, and they didn't like what he said. Said, you can't do that. And he said, well, I stood up and told him, well, that may be true, but that's how my father took this place in 1941. And he got his grade.
Indeed. From there, Patrol Squadron in Maine, where you were back with the P3s and looking for those 8,000-foot runways again. So
yes, we
it was
did.
Sort of a full circle type of thing that you'd sort of come back to what you were doing before.
Right. And the P3 airplane, once you get into it, it's addictive.
Yeah.
Because it is an airplane that's deceptive. It does things that you wouldn't expect it to do. Like everybody has seen the maneuvers in Top Gun where Tom Cruise pops the nose up of the Phantom and everybody goes past him. You could do the same thing in a P3, except you didn't pull your nose up, you pull the power back.
Right.
And all those four propellers would just come around flat to the front, and you would immediately go back to the edge of the stall. Anybody who was following you goes sailing past you.
Right.
And we used to like to play that game quite often with anybody flying a Phantom, because the Phantom could not slow down.
Exactly. And
the Air Force pilots did not appreciate us doing that. The Navy pilots knew what was coming when they got in too close to P3.
Right.
But they were fun.
You talked about one place you went, the Ascension Islands, was about as far away from anywhere that you've ever been, right?
Yes.
Yeah. In the middle of nowhere, literally, right?
If you've got to look up the Ascensions on a globe to appreciate how far out in the middle of nowhere you are. I mean, it's 8 degrees south latitude, almost dead center in the South Atlantic. And the only reason anybody's interested in it is because that was the British outpost to protect St. Helena Island, which is where they were holding Napoleon. And that was the buffer to protect St. Helena, which is 600 miles further south and even more out into the boondocks.
I think you said the nearest alternate runway was 3 hours away.
Right, the nearest, and that was in Liberia, which really wasn't too friendly.
Just got a couple of minutes left. Milton, Florida, where that last picture we saw was taken. That was back in trainers, and you taught instruments, taught acrobatics.
Right.
Yeah, to where a student or two gave you a thrill or two every once in a while, right?
I was the guy who got to handle all of the problem people who could not handle acrobatics. And that generally meant that if you had one of those students, sooner or later in your remedial flight with them, they would get you into what's called a flat inverted spin. The T-34C was made to go stable state and spins, and the airplane didn't care what condition it was in. It just spun. Well, the students would get into these things by pulling too many G's in a loop. So you go up on top. On top of a loop in a normal airplane, you just ease back on the stick to keep them spinning.
Right.
Well, these guys would keep pulling G's, and the next thing you know, the airplane does this. And it's very exciting.
Now you're to negative G's.
You're in negative G's, you're everything negative, but in the T-34C, we never told the students this. You just push the power forward and the airplane flew out of it.
You made them think they'd messed up more than they really had.
Oh, they'd messed up. It would have killed them.
Interesting story there. You finally finished your career back in Corpus, finishing there as a synthetic officer working in charge of flight simulators. And there's a lot more to tell there, but we're out of time. But I know that working there is what led you on to the career that you had post-military. I know that.
So I went right straight from simulators in the Navy to simulators at the place that builds them.
That's right. That's right. And a wonderful career it's been. And thank you for visiting with us, and thank you for your service. It's very intriguing.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for being here. Larry Stewart's love of flying made for a 2-decade naval career that he obviously treasures. He flew proudly, and he taught many others to do the same. We salute Larry Stewart for his service to the Navy and his country, and for his dedicated service today on the College Station City Council. I'm Tom Turbeville. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.